I interviewed Bob when he was named the YMCA's first citizen a number of years ago, and I really don't think I understood him until then. He had such a difficult childhood. He told me that his mother was a saint and an encourager, but his stepfather was a very difficult person, and he had a special antipathy out of the 8 children in the family for Bob. And after Bob's mother died when he was in high school, the stepfather told Bob, "You have to drop out of school and you're going to help support these children in the family." So Bob got 2 jobs. In the daytime, he pumped gas at a gas station, and at night, he washed dishes at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. He turned over every penny he made to his stepfather to help support the family. But he said he would listen to the people talking at the club, like General LeMay was there, and he said it made me want to be like him. That whole experience inspired him. And when his father was transferred to Guam, and Bob went there and he was doing physical labor, one day he saw an application to Florida State University on a bulletin board. Didn't tell his father, didn't tell anyone, applied, and a year later he was at FSU.
And showed up at FSU in 1957 with about a dime in his pocket. So in addition to all of the campus organizations and societies to which he belonged, Bob had 2 or 3 jobs most of the time. So we didn't really see a whole lot of him. But he was a major force on the campus. He was a top officer in the ROTC and finished first in his ROTC class, was a member of ODK, Gold Key, just every honor society you can think of. Somehow he met people in Sigma Chi fraternity, and they told him about rather religious foundation that Sigma Chi had, and so he joined. There were 2 major institutions that have influenced anything he might have accomplished or have become. And those were, first, Florida State University, which, as he said, made him an educated man, and Sigma Chi fraternity, which Bob credited with making him a gentleman.
And what really influenced his life is he had a friend whose father was a senator in Tallahassee. And the boys used to go and just listen to the senators in the gallery. And he was so stirred by the camaraderie, by the knowledge, the wit, and the sense of mission that senators had, that he said, one day I'm going to be a senator. He graduated from FSU. He had $5 in his pocket, and he joined the Air Force. But then when he got out of the Air Force, he decided that he was going to go to divinity school. And I think he spent about a year at Duke and decided divinity school is not for me. And he finished law school in 27 months. But to support himself while he was in law school, and this just kills me, he had 2 jobs. He was the pastor of 2 different churches in the Gainesville area. So think about that. 2 sets of sermons to write every week, all the churchly duties from marrying, praying, funerals, and he managed to do that and still get through law school in record time. He had multiple job offers after law school, but he pretty much knew he wanted to be a senator, and he decided that Sarasota would be a place that would be good to represent and that he could be elected. He came here and he told me he was lawyer number 100. They actually counted the lawyers in those days, which is hard to even imagine. And after being in law for a few years, he mounted his first campaign for political office.
Bob and I were married in 1969. He never said anything about running for political office or politics. So I was quite surprised when he decided to run for office. We had a bicycle built for 2 that Bob and I rode, and the children had unicycles. And so we drew quite a bit of attention, which of course is what we wanted. I used to love his speeches. He never said the same thing twice. It always came from the top of his head. In between the breakfast speech and the lunch speech and the evening speech, We would be knocking on doors and going to shopping centers where he could be seen and talk to people to have faith in him.
When Bob got to the Senate, he was a pretty young lawyer, and he realized that he could not support his family on the $12,000 a year that senators earned. So, in his usual non-emotional, gruff way, he started telling me about what his schedule was like in those days. When the Senate was in session, he would drive home from Tallahassee on Friday morning. Then he switched the kind of law he did from being a trial lawyer. He couldn't do that anymore because you'd have to be on hand all the time. So he went more into real estate and tax law. And he would work until midnight after he got home on Friday. He would get up very early Saturday and see all his clients all day Saturday. Then he would take his family out to dinner. Then Sunday he would get up early and work again till noon, and then drive back to Senate, where he would be doing the people's business. And he gives Pat so much credit for carrying the burden of raising the family and all that she did during his absences at the Senate. But it's just amazing to think of the kind of schedule and workload that he maintained.
I remember being little, and I said, I think I was mad because they were going to something. And I was mad because...
Well, it was something that actually they were going to, you couldn't go.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was mad that they weren't taking us with them. And I said, why is that important anyway? And he looked at me and he said, well, because the arts are important because it brings the community together. And it brings people into Sarasota to spend money, and it brings people, and it promotes tourism, and it promotes Sarasota. And what's good for Sarasota is good for Florida. And he would say things like that. And I remember thinking, when you're little, you don't think about it. But when you get older,
you also, once things are accomplished, you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we're older, we can actually see it and appreciate it, because back then we just didn't.
So Mother Houck was a fraternity house mother at FSU, and when she retired, she went to a elderly home, let's say, in Thomasville, Georgia, and Dad didn't like her situation, so we drove in the first Mercedes Dad had from Sarasota to Thomasville, Georgia, got Mother Houck and everything she owned, packed it into the Mercedes with her upholstered wooden chair over us the entire way from Thomasville to Sarasota, and put her up in a much better facility in Bradenton than what she'd had in Thomasville. And we all grew up with her as our grandmother, even though there was no blood relation.
I loved Grandma Houck, and I know how much he valued Sigma Chi fraternity. He always says that they taught him how to be a gentleman, and Grandma Houck was a piece of that, and she also took care of him there. And throughout my life and Dad's life, I have witnessed that he has made sure he took care of those who contributed to taking care of him.
When he had his mind made up about certain things, it was hard to stop him. I mean, we had a banyan tree that he was bound and determined we were going to cut down. When I say we, he and I. How old was I?
You were still a teenager.
I was a young teenager. And then Seal helped. Instead of having someone come and professionally do this, we actually had a Mercedes. That was our, what do you want to call that? Our tow?
It was everything.
Our pull vehicle.
It
we
was
would
a
actually,
tractor, it was a...
we would start cutting limbs, and he'd have the limb tied up to the Mercedes that would be on the other block, pulling the limb that way away from the house. And needless to say, that didn't work, but it would still fall straight down, right through Mom's roof, as a matter of fact, which is what she told us not to do.
Well, as I look out on Sarasota, I have this magnificent view. I can see Bob's apartment where he lived at the time of his death, but I can see all kinds of evidences of Senator Bob Johnson's importance to this community. You just can't look very far without seeing something that is a great asset to the community that we would not have had it not been for Senator Bob Johnson. They include New College, He was a major supporter of having the state of Florida take over New College and support it financially. He was a major supporter of the state of Florida and through Florida State University taking over the Ringling Museum of Art, breathing new life into that and helping to make it one of the nation's premier art museums.
Helped designate the Mayaka a wild and scenic river, was instrumental in saving the Oslo. And something that also impressed me is he liked to say that if we lose any of our environment, we lose our quality of life. Such a Bob Johnson story. He learned that Arvida was planning to build 2 massive condominiums and golf courses on what's now South Lido Park. Within a week, he had raised $1 million in seed money for a bond issue to make that a public park. But he was so smart, he knew that he'd have to give the people in South County something as well for them to support the bond issue. So he went down to see Finn Casperson, who owned a huge amount of land in Venice. And he convinced Finn to sell Casperson Beach to Sarasota County. So the bond issue proposed making a massive park both in South County and at South Lido, and that passed 9-1. We wouldn't have those parks today if it weren't for the vision of Bob.
I first met Bob Johnson in 1992 when I came to New College, and Bob was on the board of the New College Foundation. And as I got to know Bob, I realized that that rather crusty exterior of his hid a very intelligent guy who worked very, very hard, and most of all was really dedicated to good causes, including New College. And Bob and I developed a nice relationship during those years, but it was really after New College became independent in 2001, and we suddenly had a board of trustees. And I was named president of the college, and Bob was chairman of the board of trustees, and suddenly we were joined at the hip and did a lot of traveling together. And on our first trip together to Tallahassee, which was to, in fact, meet with Governor Bush and get him to think a little bit more kindly towards New College in that period in the early 2000s. Bob and I took a stroll down where the legislature has all their offices, down the office buildings. And with his gravelly voice, chatting up people as he saw them, "Hi, how are you, good to see you," that sort of thing, I gradually noticed that people down the hallway were popping out of their offices and looking out with curiosity and seeing Bob and brightening up. And Bob hadn't been in the legislature for almost a decade, but they'd come out and say, "Senator Johnson, it's so great to see you. We miss you up here so much." And then they'd all have these stories about how he worked successfully across the aisle. He was a Republican during a time of Democratic dominance of the legislature. Despite that forceful personality, he really had the capacity to work across boundary lines, make connections for good causes.
I'm sitting here in front of the statue that was dedicated to Bob Johnson on the 50th anniversary of New College. The design of the statue, or the concept of the statue, was incorporated in the seal of the college when it was first created. It was created by the graphics department of I.M. Pei, the famous architect, who also designed some of the buildings here on campus. Bob has been dedicated for many years to this college. When in the legislature, he was able to procure over $7 million to help build the library here, the berms, and the US 41 overpass, which connected the two college campuses and made it more one. At the day of dedication, Bob stood up and was very humble in receiving the honor of having the Four Winds statue dedicated to him. He said he wasn't quite sure whether he could have ever met the requirements to become a student here at New College, but he certainly had his daughter and his grandson go here and graduate from New College. In closing, he said, "This statue will be there for you to remember that I'm watching you. In another 50 years, I would come back and haunt you if you haven't taken care of this college."
He was just a man of remarkable energy and a total and complete commitment to giving back to the community all the things he thought the community had given to him. So I can't think of any person who's more deserving of all the honors than Bob Johnson.